Imagine yourself waking in a small mud brick house before the first light of dawn. The air is heavy, even at this early hour, carrying a trace of coolness that will vanish the moment the sun rises. You sleep on a mat of reeds, your body still stiff from yesterday's labor. Around you, your family stirs, children curled together under woven blankets, a spouse already reaching for a jar of water. The floor is dusty. The walls are rough and bare, made of clay and straw. There is no luxury here. Your meals are simple, bread coarse and gritty with sand from the grinding stones, perhaps a few onions, and beer thick and cloudy to wash it down. This is the breakfast of a farmer in ancient Egypt, and it must sustain you for hours of unrelenting work. Outside, the Nile waits. Its waters rise and fall with the seasons, and your life depends entirely on its rhythm. In the season of inundation, the fields are drowned. In the season of planting, you bend and sow seeds into the moist earth, and in the season of harvest, you sweat and strain to gather grain beneath a punishing sun. The work is endless. You carry water in heavy jars, balancing them carefully on your shoulders. You guide oxen to drag wooden plows through the mud. You bend low hour after hour, cutting stalks of wheat with a curved sickle, the reeds scraping your hands. By midday, your back burns, your skin darkened and raw from the sun. Mosquitoes swarm near the irrigation channels, biting, buzzing, relentless. Sand creeps into your sandals, grinding against your feet until every step becomes an irritation. And when the harvest is finally gathered, a large portion is not yours to keep. Scribes arrive to measure the yield. They write it down carefully on their papyrus rolls, and they collect taxes, not in coin, but in grain, in oil, in labor. Sometimes you are called to leave your fields behind and work on state projects, digging canals, repairing dikes, or even hauling blocks of stone for temples. It is service owed to the pharaoh, but to you it is time lost from tending your own plot of land. The farmer's life is hard, yes, but it is also predictable. The Nile rises, the Nile falls. Year after year, your routine is the same. You wake before dawn. You labor under the sun. You eat bread and drink beer. You sleep, sore and weary, on your reed mat. And then it begins again. Your house is modest. Its roof is flat, sometimes used to sleep under the open sky when the heat inside is too stifling. Goats bleat nearby. Chickens scratch in the dirt. Children chase each other in the dusty streets between homes, their laughter mixing with the calls of neighbors. There is little privacy, but there is a shared rhythm, a sense that everyone, as survival, is tied to the same river, the same fields, the same toil. When illness comes, and it often does, you rely on simple remedies: garlic, honey, prayers, and charms. The work does not stop for fever, nor does it stop when floods fail, when the Nile brings too little water. In such years, hunger spreads. You chew dry bread, you ration beer, and you wait for the river to rise again. And yet there is pride too. You know that without you, poor, and your neighbors, the temples would stand empty, the granaries bare, the cities unfed. The pharaoh himself depends on your harvest. Though your name may never be carved in stone, your labor is what keeps Egypt alive. Life as a farmer in ancient Egypt is not glamorous. It is mud, sweat, sun, and silence. It is a back bent over the earth and eyes squinting against the glare. But it is also life woven into the eternal rhythm of the Nile, a cycle that endures long after footprints fade into sand. Step away from the fields for a moment and into the heart of daily life, the home. In ancient Egypt, the home was usually built from the simplest and most abundant material of all, mud. From the banks of the Nile, mud mixed with straw was shaped into bricks and dried beneath the sun. These bricks formed the walls of nearly every dwelling, from the humblest hut to the grandest townhouses of officials. And while the pharaoh might have marble temples and gilded tombs, you, an ordinary family, return each night to a small mud brick house, fragile against time, but alive with noise, movement, and warmth. Picture the house from the outside. It is square or rectangular, with walls pale in the sunlight, cracked from the heat. The door is simple wood, often low, forcing you to duck your head to pass inside. Windows are rare, and if they exist, they are small slits covered with woven mats. Airflow is limited, and so the inside is dim, smoky, and often hot. Yet this is where your family eats, sleeps, and lives every moment not spent in the fields or markets. Inside, the space is sparse. A reed mat covers the floor, sometimes a few stools carved from wood if your family is fortunate. A low table holds jars of beer, baskets of onions, perhaps a bundle of dates if the harvest was kind. There are clay pots blackened from fire, a grinding stone where grain is pounded into flour, and a clay oven in one corner. The walls are rough, sometimes painted with a wash of white plaster, but more often bare. At night, you sleep on simple mats, sometimes with a headrest made of wood or ivory, curved to support the skull. To modern eyes, this headrest looks uncomfortable, but for Egyptians it was ordinary. Families slept close together. Parents, children, even animals sometimes brought inside when the night grew cold or unsafe. Privacy was rare. The house was small, often just 1 or 2 rooms, so everyone shared the same air, the same noises, the same smells. The rooftop was more than a roof, flat and sturdy. It became an extension of the living space. During hot nights, families carried their mats up a small staircase and slept beneath the stars, cooled by the desert breeze. During the day, women dried laundry there, or spread fruit and fish to cure in the sun. Children played, chasing each other to the edge, while mothers called out warnings. From the roof, you could look across the clustered houses of your neighbors, a dense, noisy village where sound carried easily from one wall to the next. And it was noisy. Imagine goats bleating, donkeys braying, chickens scratching the earth, neighbors calling greetings or shouting over fences, children crying or singing nonsense songs while they played. From the temple down the road, the steady beat of a drum carried into the air, while incense drifted faintly on the breeze. It was a world of constant sound, without silence, except at the deepest hour of the night. Life inside these homes was also dusty. The walls crumbled slightly with each season. Sand blew in through the doorway. The grinding of grain filled the air with grit. Meals tasted faintly of ash from the oven, or of sand that clung stubbornly to bread. The floor was swept, yes, but dirt never truly left. It clung to your clothes, your skin, even the corners of your eyes. Family life was close, sometimes too close. Generations often lived together, grandparents telling stories while children ran circles around them. Husbands and wives shared the labor, men often working in the fields or on state projects, women managing the home, brewing beer, baking bread, weaving cloth. Children learned early to fetch water, tend animals, and help with chores. From the moment you could walk, you had a role in keeping the household alive. The house was also a place of ritual. In a small niche carved into the wall, you might find a household shrine. A clay figure of a protective god, perhaps base with his dwarf-like body and fierce grin, watching over the family. Offerings of bread or beer might be placed there. For many, religion was not confined to the temple, but lived in the home, woven into the daily rhythm of work, meals, and sleep. And though the home was simple, it was resilient. When one wall cracked, you patched it with fresh mud. When the roof leaked, you laid new reeds. Entire houses could be built or repaired with the labor of neighbors, a community effort that reinforced bonds. You might borrow tools from the family next door, and in return, lend grain or help them in the fields. The house was never an isolated space. It was part of a living network of neighbors, each bound to the same fragile existence on the Nile. When you think of ancient Egypt, it is easy to imagine pyramids, temples, and golden treasures. But in truth, most Egyptians lived in these modest mud brick homes. They did not glitter. They did not endure like stone. They crumbled into the earth with time. Yet, for those who lived inside, they were warm, full of life, and the center of a noisy, crowded human world. So, as you picture the grandeur of the Nile, remember also the dim interiors of mud brick houses, the smell of bread baking, the sound of children laughing, the press of neighbors on every side. It was not silent, it was not spacious, but it was home. Imagine a pharaoh standing alone in the vast courtyard of a temple, the desert wind whispering across sandstone columns. He is not like the kings before him, nor like the kings who will follow. His name is Akhenaten, and he dared to reshape the entire fabric of Egyptian life, its gods, its temples, its art, and even its very identity. For a time, he held the kingdom in his grasp, but he paid for his boldness with isolation, resistance, and, ultimately, the erasure of his name from history. Let us begin at the start. Akhenaten was not born as Akhenaten at all. His birth name was Amenhotep IV, a son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, one of the most powerful rulers of Egypt's Golden Age. Bow as a young prince, Amenhotep grew up surrounded by magnificence. Palaces filled with painted walls, vast gardens watered by the Nile, and a court buzzing with priests, officials, and servants. He would have seen his father worshipping the great god Ammon, whose temples at Karnak and Luxor dominated the religious landscape of the kingdom. But even as a child, something about Amenhotep was different. Ancient art suggests he may have had an unusual appearance, a long face, narrow limbs, and a body shape that artists would later exaggerate into surreal, almost otherworldly forms. We do not know if this was truly how he looked, or if it was a symbolic choice. But the image of the young prince is one of strangeness and difference. When Amenhotep IV came to the throne, he inherited a kingdom at its peak of wealth and power. Yet, instead of continuing the traditions that had secured Egypt's prosperity, he chose another path. He began to elevate a single deity above all others, Aton, the visible disk of the sun. Aton was not new, but under Amenhotep, Aton became more than a sun god. Aton became the only god worth worshipping. The change began quietly. In his early years as King Amenhotep built temples dedicated to Aten in Thebes, where the priests of Ammon still held immense power. But soon, his devotion grew bolder. He changed his own name from Amenhotep, meaning Ammon is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten. In doing so, he publicly broke with the powerful cult of Ammon. It was a declaration of war, not against armies, but against the deepest traditions of Egyptian society. The reforms spread quickly. Traditional temples were closed. Their revenues, once directed to Ammon's priests, were seized for the state. Statues of the old gods were defaced, their names chiseled out of inscriptions. In their place, Akhenaten promoted the worship of Aten, not as a human-shaped figure, but as a blazing sun disk, its rays stretching down to earth, each ending in a hand offering life. To embody this new world, Akhenaten built a new capital city, Akhenaten, which means the horizon of the Aten. Today we call it Amarna, rising in the desert, far from Thebes and its traditions. This city was planned with wide avenues, open courtyards, and temples without roofs, so that sunlight could fall directly upon the worshippers. Imagine walking through its streets, the walls painted in bright colors, the palaces decorated with images of the royal family basking in Aten's rays. The city itself was a hymn to the sun, and at the heart of this hymn was Akhenaten himself, joined by his queen Nefertiti. Together, they were portrayed in a way no pharaoh and queen had ever been before. Not stiff and formal, but relaxed, intimate, even tender. In art, they held their daughters on their laps, kissed their children, and appeared almost like a family next door, except that their family was believed to be divine. Aten's rays touched only them directly, making them the sole link between the god and the people. But while the art glowed with warmth, the reality was colder. Many Egyptians struggled with this sudden shift. For generations, they had prayed to Osiris for guidance in the afterlife, to Hathor for love and fertility, to Ammon for protection and power. Now, those gods were silenced. Priests who once held influence were stripped of authority. Ordinary people were told to worship a distant sun disk, accessible only through the pharaoh. For many, this must have felt strange, even empty. Beyond religion, Akhenaten's focus on Aten meant neglect elsewhere. Military campaigns faltered, the empire's borders weakened. Letters from foreign rulers pleading for aid went unanswered. While Akhenaten built his new city, vassals in Syria and Canaan wrote desperate appeals on clay tablets, messages we still have today, known as the Amarna letters. Again and again, they cry for soldiers, for gold, for support. But Akhenaten was more concerned with praising Aten than maintaining Egypt's dominance abroad. Within his city, however, life continued with devotion and routine. Each day, offerings were made to Aten in open-air temples. Hymns were sung, praising the light that gave life to plants, animals, and people alike. Akhenaten himself may have written some of these hymns, filled with poetic lines, comparing Aten's rays to a father's embrace, a universal source of love. The king saw himself not only as ruler, but as poet and prophet. Yet even in this golden sunlight, shadows grew. His new city, Amarna, was built quickly, and its walls were fragile. Its beauty was short-lived, crumbling within years after his death. His family life, though idealized in art, may not have been as harmonious as it appeared. Some of his daughters died young. His beloved Nefertiti vanished from records after a time, leaving historians to wonder whether she fell from favor, died, or perhaps ruled briefly under another name. And Akhenaten himself grew increasingly isolated, surrounded by flatterers, cut off from traditional centers of power, and devoted entirely to his vision of Aten. He seems to have withdrawn into his own dream of sunlight, while the world around him weakened. When he died, his experiment collapsed almost immediately. His city was abandoned. The old gods were restored. The name of Akhenaten was scratched from monuments, his memory cursed and hidden. His son, the boy who would become Tutankhamun, restored the temples of Ammon and returned to Thebes, undoing nearly everything his father had created. And so Akhenaten became the lonely pharaoh, a man who reached for the eternal light of the sun, but lost the solid ground beneath his feet. His reign remains one of the most unusual in Egyptian history. A bold vision, a fragile city, a kingdom left weakened, and a legacy nearly erased. Tonight, as you let your eyes grow heavy, imagine that deserted city in the desert, its streets empty, its walls fading into sand. The sun still shines above it, but the man who built it is gone, leaving behind only broken temples and a strange, lonely dream of light. Picture yourself sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, the hot Egyptian sun filtering in through a narrow doorway. In front of you lies a reed brush, a palette smeared with black and red ink, and a long roll of papyrus waiting to be filled. You are a scribe, one of the few in Egypt who can read and write. It is a position of privilege, but also of endless strain. From the outside, being a scribe might seem like a gentle life. Unlike the farmers breaking their backs in the fields, or the soldiers marching into foreign lands, scribes spent their days in shaded rooms, working with their hands and minds. They were the record keepers of Egypt, the ones who gave permanence to words, who transformed the spoken commands of kings into written law, who calculated grain harvests, tax records, and temple offerings. Without scribes, the machinery of Egypt would have ground to a halt. But the path to becoming a scribe was not simple. It began in childhood. Boys, usually from families with connections to officials or temples, were sent to the House of Life, the scribe schools attached to major temples. There, under the stern gaze of teachers, they memorized signs, practiced copying out lines again and again, and endured a strict discipline. Students were often beaten for mistakes. A common Egyptian proverb said, "A boy's ears are on his back. He listens when he is beaten." For young apprentices, writing was as much about obedience as it was about learning. The lessons were relentless. Egyptian writing, hieroglyphs, contained hundreds of signs, some representing sounds, others entire words or ideas. A student had to memorize them all, along with the cursive forms used for everyday documents, known as hieratic. Each day, students copied out wisdom texts, proverbs, and moral instructions, their hands aching as they traced the same symbols again and again. Imagine sitting for hours in a small room, the smell of papyrus and ink filling the air, your knees stiff, your reed pen leaving smudges across the page. Those who endured eventually graduated into the life of a working scribe. Some were attached to temples, where they recorded offerings, sacrifices, and rituals. Others worked in the service of officials, keeping track of taxes, land boundaries, and labor assignments. A few became court scribes, writing decrees for the pharaoh himself. Wherever they worked, scribes were essential, but also invisible. They were the quiet hands behind every record, the unseen eyes behind every list. A typical day was long and repetitive. At dawn, a scribe might join his superior to oversee the collection of grain. He would stand in the sun as farmers delivered sacks of barley, carefully weighing and tallying each one, then scribbling the figures onto a tablet or papyrus roll. Later, he might be called to a construction site where gangs of workers were building temples or tombs. There, he recorded the number of bricks laid, the hours worked, and the supplies consumed. Every loaf of bread, every jug of beer, every tool had to be accounted for. In quieter moments, a scribe sat, bent over his writing, brush in hand. The tools were simple: a wooden palette with 2 wells of ink, black for regular text, red for headings or corrections. The brush was a sharpened reed, chewed at the tip to form bristles. Ink was made from soot and water, mixed with gum to make it stick. Papyrus, though expensive, was the standard medium. A skilled scribe could write quickly, his hand flowing over the surface with practiced ease, but the posture was punishing. Hunched forward, knees folded beneath him, hours slipping by in silence. The work carried prestige, but also strain. Ancient Egyptian texts reveal a kind of propaganda used to encourage boys to become scribes. One well-known text, the satire of the trades, paints every other job as miserable. The farmer bent double in the fields, the stonemason covered in dust, the soldier marching until his feet bleed. The message was clear. Be a scribe, and you will escape such hardships. Yet the reality was not so simple. Scribes may not have lifted stones, but they bore the weight of bureaucracy. Mistakes could mean lost grain, angry officials, or even punishment. And though their work was respected, they were also tightly bound to their superiors' demands. Health was another hidden burden. Spending so many hours seated, scribes likely suffered from stiff joints, back pain, and poor eyesight. The ink could stain their fingers, the papyrus dust their lungs, tomb paintings. Scribes are often depicted thin, with narrow shoulders, perhaps a reflection of the toll their sedentary work took on their bodies. And despite the prestige of their role, not all scribes lived luxuriously. Many were middle-ranking officials, dependent on the goodwill of those above them. Still, being a scribe opened doors. Literacy was rare, and those who could wield it had access to power. Some scribes rose to high office, becoming overseers, governors, or even viziers, the pharaoh's right-hand man. Their knowledge made them indispensable, even if their names were often forgotten. As evening fell, a scribe might roll up his papyrus, wipe his palate clean, and stretch his aching legs. The day's records would be stored in a temple archive or an official's chamber, bound together in the great river of Egyptian bureaucracy. Tomorrow, more lists, more tallies, more writing would come. The cycle was endless, but in that endlessness lay the strength of Egypt. Tonight, as you rest, imagine yourself as one of those scribes, your brush scratching softly on papyrus, your hand steady even as your back grows sore, your mind carrying the weight of a kingdom's order. You are not a warrior, nor a farmer, nor a pharaoh, but without you, the temples fall silent, the granaries go uncounted, and the state itself loses its memory. You are the quiet keeper of Egypt's life, one word, one line at a time. Imagine for a moment the stillness of an ancient workshop. A priest bends over a roll of fresh papyrus, carefully dipping his reed brush into ink made from soot and resin. Line by line, he traces delicate hieroglyphs, not just words, but spells, protections, and promises. This is no ordinary text. It is the Book of the Dead, a guide for the soul after death, a roadmap to eternity. The name we use today, Book of the Dead, is modern. To the Egyptians, it was known as the Book of Going Forth by Day. It was not a single, fixed book, but rather a collection of spells and illustrations, chosen and arranged to suit the person who commissioned it. No two copies were exactly alike. Some were long and elaborate, stretching for meters, filled with vibrant colors and detailed vignettes. Others were shorter, modest scrolls with only a few key spells. What they all had in common was their purpose, to help the soul navigate the challenges of the afterlife. To understand why this book mattered so much, you must step into the Egyptian view of existence. For them, life was only one part of a larger cycle. Death was not an end, but a crossing, a dangerous, uncertain passage toward renewal. The soul had to journey through realms filled with obstacles, demons, and gates. Without guidance, it risked becoming lost, trapped, or destroyed. Book of the Dead provided the tools, the right words at the right time, to unlock doors, placate guardians, and ensure safe passage. Producing such a manuscript was itself a sacred act. Scribes trained in temple scriptoria prepared the papyrus, smoothing its surface and cutting it into long rolls. Ink was mixed black for the main text, red for important words or headings. Artists added small, vivid illustrations. A god weighing the heart of a soul. A boat sailing across the night sky. Or protective amulets drawn in miniature. These images were more than decoration. To the Egyptians, pictures held power. To show an action was, in a sense, to make it real. Commissioning a Book of the Dead was expensive. Only the wealthy could afford a full-length scroll. Often, it was prepared in advance of death, customized with the name of the owner, or sometimes left blank to be filled in later. For ordinary Egyptians, the cost was beyond reach. Instead, they relied on simpler charms, spoken prayers, or perhaps a single spell painted on their coffin. But whether grand or simple, the goal was the same: protection and guidance in the journey beyond. The text itself contained over 190 known spells, though no single copy held them all. Some were practical instructions: how to address the guardians at the gates, how to avoid snares and traps, how to speak the names of demons so they would not harm you. Others were transformative, spells to turn into a bird, a lotus flower, or a serpent, granting the soul freedom of movement. Still others were protective, charms to keep the heart from betraying the soul during judgment, or to provide food and drink in the afterlife. The most famous scene from the Book of the Dead is the weighing of the heart. Imagine it. The soul is led before Osiris, lord of the underworld, seated on his throne beneath a canopy of reeds. Before him stands a great scale. On one side, the heart of the deceased, heavy with memory, thought, and deed. On the other, the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and order. If the heart balances with the feather, the soul is justified, free to enter the eternal fields of paradise. If it is heavier, burdened with wrongdoing, it is cast to Ammit, the devourer, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus. In that instant, the soul ceases to exist. To prepare for this moment, Egyptians recited spell 30B of the Book of the Dead, sometimes inscribed on heart-shaped amulets placed on the chest of the deceased. The words pleaded, "O my heart, do not stand against me as a witness. Do not be hostile against me in the presence of the tribunal." It was both a prayer and a command, a way of ensuring the heart would not betray its owner. Reading these spells today, we might see them as superstitions, as fragments of an ancient religion. But for the Egyptians, they were acts of comfort. The afterlife was vast, uncertain, and filled with danger. To carry a scroll of protective words was like carrying a lantern in the dark, a way to bring reassurance and control to the most mysterious of journeys. There is something deeply calming in this. The idea that words, carefully chosen and repeated, could provide a kind of shield, bet by holding a book. By reading the right lines, you could face death with less fear. In that sense, the Book of the Dead was not just for the departed, but also for the living, a promise that the order of Ma had extended even into the shadowy realms beyond. And so, as night deepens around you, imagine lying in the still silence of a tomb, a papyrus scroll tucked beside you, its ink still fresh, its spells waiting to be spoken. Around you, the desert lies quiet, the stars blazing overhead. Beyond the darkness, gates and guardians await, but you are not afraid. You carry with you the words of power, the gentle reassurance that you will go forth by day, rising again with the sun. Imagine dawn breaking over the golden city of Ramses, the royal capital founded by Pharaoh Ramses II. The sun rises over gleaming limestone walls and vast courtyards, casting long shadows across colossal statues of the king himself. These statues, carved in his own likeness, stand not only as guardians of the palace, but as reminders to every visitor that this was the house of a man who claimed divinity. Ramses II, often called the Great, ruled for more than 6 decades. His palace was not just a residence, but a stage, a carefully crafted environment where ritual, politics, and daily life all intertwined. To imagine a single day in this palace is to step into a world of ceremony, order, and endless work. The palace itself was immense. Long corridors opened into courtyards decorated with painted columns, their surfaces alive with images of gods, battles, and offerings. Floors might be inlaid with colorful tiles, some painted to resemble ponds with fish and birds. Gardens, watered through channels fed by the Nile, offered shade beneath palm and sycamore trees. Pools stocked with lotus flowers glistened in the morning light, their fragrance drifting into open-air halls. The palace was at once a seat of power and a carefully designed symbol of cosmic order. At dawn, the day began with ritual. Priests of the household performed offerings to the gods on behalf of the pharaoh, ensuring the harmony of Mat, the universal order that bound gods, humans, and nature. Ramses himself might join in select ceremonies, his actions carefully choreographed, washing his hands in sacred water, presenting incense, or placing food before a shrine. Every movement was symbolic, reinforcing his role as mediator between the divine and the mortal world. After ritual came governance. Ramses II presided over a court filled with scribes, officials, and foreign envoys. Each morning, he might receive petitions, farmers requesting tax relief after a poor harvest, or soldiers asking for recognition of their service. Envoys from neighboring lands brought tribute: ivory from Nubia, cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. In these moments, the palace became a hub of international diplomacy, its halls echoing with languages from across the ancient world. The sessions were long, often extending through the heat of midday. Scribes recorded every decree, every decision, their reed pens scratching steadily across papyrus. The pharaoh's word was law, and yet each pronouncement required careful negotiation. Ramses was both king and politician, balancing the interests of priests, nobles, generals, and foreign powers. His presence, stern, immovable, was as important as his words. When court business allowed, Ramses turned his attention to his greatest obsession, building. No pharaoh in Egyptian history left behind more monuments than he. His name, carved into stone, appears on temples from Nubia to the Delta. In Pyramuses alone, colossal building projects demanded constant oversight. Workers quarried stone, hauled blocks, and erected towering statues, while artists chiseled reliefs depicting Ramses' victories. One of his most famous constructions was the temple at Abu Simbel, far to the south. Its colossal seated figures, carved directly into a cliff face, still gaze across the Nile today. Ramses did not build simply to house gods or serve the people. He built to be remembered, to cast his shadow across eternity. Yet, amidst the grandeur, palace life was also rigidly structured. Servants moved quietly through the halls, carrying food, water, and messages. Guards stood watch at every gate, their spears gleaming in the sun. Musicians sometimes played softly in the courtyards, their harps and flutes providing gentle background to the otherwise formal atmosphere. Meals in the palace reflected both wealth and order. Bread, beer, and vegetables formed the staples. But Ramses enjoyed delicacies, roasted meats, figs, dates, and honey. Dishes were served on fine vessels, sometimes inlaid with gold. Eating itself was a ceremonial act, and even within the palace, etiquette was strict. The pharaoh dined apart, attended by trusted servants. Others ate according to rank, their places in the hierarchy visible even at the table. Family life, too, unfolded within this grand stage. Ramses had many wives, the most prominent of whom was Nefertari, his beloved queen. She was honored with her own magnificent temple, equal in scale to Ramses' own, a rare acknowledgement of a royal consort's importance. The palace would have echoed with the voices of children, courtiers, and attendants, a constant stream of movement and intrigue. As the day turned to evening, ceremonies resumed. The pharaoh might receive updates from generals, news from distant garrisons, or reports of foreign rebellions. He was a warrior king, after all, remembered for the Battle of Kadesh, a confrontation with the Hittites that he later proclaimed as a great victory. In truth, it was likely a stalemate, but in the palace reliefs, Ramses was always the triumphant hero, larger than life, driving back his enemies. At night, torches lit the halls, their flickering flames casting shadows across painted walls. The pharaoh retired to private chambers, where incense burned and musicians might play to ease the transition into rest. Yet even in these moments of apparent calm, the palace never slept. Servants remained alert, guards stood watch, and scribes prepared records for the next day. The palace of Ramses II was, in many ways, a reflection of Egypt itself, vast, ordered, ritualized, and endlessly busy. For those who lived within its walls, life was a constant balance between duty and survival, formality and comfort. For Ramses himself, every day was another step in the pursuit of immortality. And so, as you close your eyes, picture yourself within those great halls, the sound of sandals echoing on stone, the scent of lotus blossoms drifting from the gardens, the soft rustle of papyrus as scribes record the deeds of the day. The pharaoh's presence is everywhere, larger than life, eternal. The palace sleeps lightly, just as Egypt itself breathes between the rhythm of the Nile and the promise of the rising sun. Imagine the air inside a small chamber near the temple. The walls are lined with shelves, holding jars of dried herbs, fragments of resin, and rolls of papyrus containing lists of remedies. A priest-physician sits cross-legged, mixing honey with powdered herbs, while murmuring an incantation under his breath. For the ancient Egyptians, healing was never just a matter of the body. It was also about balance, the favor of the gods, and the unseen forces that shaped life. Egyptian medicine was remarkably advanced for its time, yet deeply intertwined with religion. A healer was often both a physician and a priest, working with practical remedies while also invoking divine protection. To heal was not only to treat symptoms, but to restore Ma at the harmony between body, spirit, and the wider universe. The foundation of medical knowledge was laid out in papyri, ancient scrolls filled with observations, remedies, and incantations. One of the most famous is the Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BC. Over 100 pages long, it contains hundreds of prescriptions for everything from stomach pains to skin diseases. Another, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, offers what looks strikingly like surgical case studies, describing injuries, diagnoses, and treatments with a rational, almost scientific tone. The remedies themselves drew on the natural world. Honey was a common ingredient, valued for its antibacterial properties, something the Egyptians could not explain scientifically, but clearly observed in practice. Garlic and onions were prescribed to boost strength and treat infections. Willow bark, rich in the same compound found in modern aspirin, was used to ease pain and inflammation. Castor oil served as a laxative, while pomegranate was given to combat intestinal parasites. Yet these remedies were rarely given without words of power. A physician might apply a poultice to a wound while chanting a spell to drive away the evil spirit thought to cause the illness. The act of speaking was as important as the act of healing. Disease, in their worldview, was not only physical but also spiritual, a disturbance in the cosmic balance. Surgery was rare but not unknown. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes setting broken bones, treating dislocated jaws, and even performing sutures on wounds. Bandages made from linen were used to cover injuries, sometimes soaked in honey or resin to prevent infection. Still, surgery was limited, as the risks were high and the understanding of internal anatomy was incomplete. Much of what Egyptians knew about the body came from mummification. Yet paradoxically, embalmers and physicians were often distinct groups, working with different purposes and taboos. One fascinating aspect of Egyptian medicine was its emphasis on prevention. Cleanliness played a role, not only for spiritual reasons, but also for health. Priests bathed several times a day in sacred pools, and shaving body hair was common, reducing the risk of lice and infection. Diet was also considered important. Texts warn against overeating, recommending moderation in food and drink. The line between doctor and magician was always blurred. Amulets shaped like protective gods were worn to ward off illness. A small eye of Horus, carved in stone or faience, might be tied around a patient's neck to ensure recovery. Spells invoked deities like Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague, or Thoth, the god of wisdom, believed to have written the very words of healing. For childbirth, one of the most dangerous moments in life, women turned to both midwives and magic. Wooden birth bricks, placed under the mother, were decorated with protective figures. Spells called on Hathor, goddess of motherhood, to safeguard both mother and child. Remedies were also prescribed: dates, honey, and herbs meant to ease labor pains or prevent complications. Dentistry, too, was part of Egyptian medical practice, though perhaps not very comfortably. Archaeologists have found evidence of severe dental wear in mummies, caused by sand and grit mixed into bread from stone-ground flour. Remedies included filling cavities with honey and crushed barley, or packing gaps with linen. Though rudimentary, it showed a clear effort to treat suffering, even if relief was limited. Perhaps most striking of all is how much Egyptian medical practice foreshadowed later traditions. Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen admired and borrowed from Egyptian knowledge. Some remedies traveled across centuries, still recognizable in folk medicine today. The Egyptians may have mixed spells with salves, but their careful observation of symptoms and treatments left a lasting legacy. And so, in the hush of that temple chamber, as the healer murmurs over his herbs, you glimpse a world where medicine was both science and ritual, where healing came through the touch of a hand and the rhythm of a chant. Imagine yourself lying there, a linen bandage wrapped gently around your arm, the sweet scent of honey and resin drifting into the air, while words of comfort are spoken softly beside you. For the Egyptians, this was healing, the blending of body, spirit, and cosmos, the reassurance that pain could be eased not only by herbs, but by harmony itself. Imagine walking at dawn along the banks of the Nile, the mist lifting slowly as the first light gilds the stone walls of a colossal structure. Rising above the villages and fields is a temple, its pylons painted with vivid colors, its courtyards echoing with the footsteps of priests preparing for the day. To the ancient Egyptians, temples were not just places of worship. They were the very dwelling places of the gods, carefully designed to connect the human world with the divine. A temple was, in a sense, the house of a god. Each major deity, whether Amun, Ra, Hathor, or Isis, had temples built in their honor, where rituals were carried out daily to maintain cosmic balance, or Mat. Without these rituals, the Egyptians believed the universe could slip into chaos. The rising of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the cycle of life and death, all depended on proper devotion to the gods. The design of a temple was no accident. Entering one meant moving from the outer world of humans to the hidden, sacred world of the divine. The great stone gateways, called pylons, marked the threshold. Beyond them stretched open courtyards where common people might gather during festivals. Deeper inside, hypostyle halls rose like stone forests, with towering columns covered in carved hieroglyphs and painted reliefs. These spaces grew darker, quieter, and more restricted as one moved inward, until finally, at the very heart of the temple, lay the sanctuary. In the sanctuary stood a small, hidden chamber that housed the statue of the god. This was not merely a representation to the Egyptians. It was the living presence of the deity, renewed daily through ritual. Only the high priests and the pharaoh could approach this sacred image. Each morning, before the city stirred fully awake, the temple priests performed the opening of the mouth ritual. They bathed, shaved, and dressed in pure linen, symbolizing their separation from ordinary life. Entering the sanctuary, they greeted the god as if waking a king. The statue was washed with water, anointed with oils, and dressed in fine garments. Offerings of bread, beer, vegetables, fruit, and meat were laid before it, along with incense to carry prayers heavenward. Once the offerings were made, the food was later distributed among the priests. This was not seen as waste, but as a way of sharing in the divine presence. The ritual itself, performed in silence except for chants, was believed to renew the power of the god and, by extension, the harmony of Egypt. Festivals expanded these daily rituals into grand spectacles. During the festival of Opet in Thebes, the statue of Ammon was carried out of the temple of Karnak in a ceremonial bark, escorted by priests, musicians, and dancers. Crowds gathered along the processional way, cheering as the god's image traveled toward the Luxor temple. Such festivals were moments when ordinary people, normally barred from the inner sanctuaries, could witness and participate in divine celebrations. Music and chant were integral to temple life. Harps, flutes, and sistrums, sacred rattles associated with the goddess Hathor, filled the air during ceremonies. Priests and priestesses recited hymns, their voices rising in rhythm with the instruments. For the Egyptians, sound itself was a sacred force, able to stir the gods and maintain cosmic balance. Temples were also centers of knowledge and power. Within their walls, scribes kept records of offerings, taxes, and rituals. Libraries of papyri stored hymns, medical texts, and astronomical observations. Observing the stars was especially important, for the priests aligned temples with celestial events, such as the rising of Sirius, which heralded the annual Nile flood. The temple economy was vast. Large estates of farmland, herds of cattle, workshops, and granaries were attached to the great temples. Thousands of workers, farmers, artisans, bakers, brewers, labored to sustain the flow of offerings. In this way, temples were not only religious centers, but also engines of economic and political power. But there was another layer. The hidden rituals, the mysteries performed away from the eyes of the public. Some ceremonies were conducted only by select priests, invoking protective spells or summoning divine visions. These secret rites, inscribed on temple walls in coded hieroglyphs, hint at a deeper dimension of Egyptian spirituality, one where the boundary between human and divine could be crossed. Temples also embodied symbolism in their very architecture. The floor sloped upward as one moved toward the sanctuary, echoing the rising mound of creation. The ceiling, painted with stars, represented the heavens, while columns shaped like papyrus and lotus plants symbolized the marshes of the primeval waters. Entering a temple was thus a journey through the cosmos, from chaos into order, from the earthly into the eternal. Imagine standing in the hypostyle hall of Karnak, sunlight filtering through high, clear-story windows, the scent of incense lingering in the cool air. The murmur of prayers echoes against massive stone pillars. You feel small, but also part of something vast, as if the walls themselves are alive with divine presence. For the Egyptians, temples were not places to gather in community, as in later religions, but rather places where humans maintained the universe by caring for the gods. Without the rituals, the sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood, and life itself could unravel. The stakes of each offering, each hymn, each gesture were nothing less than the survival of the world. And so, in the hush of the inner sanctuary, a priest places a garland of fresh flowers before the statue of Ammon. The doors close, the incense swirls, and the god, unseen but ever present, is renewed for another day. Picture, if you will, the calm waters of the Nile shimmering in the morning light. Along its banks, in the villages and towns, farmers begin their day. Yet, in certain corners of Egypt, another kind of morning begins, not with plows and baskets, but with bows, shields, and the beating of war drums. For while Egypt is often remembered for its temples and tombs, it was also a civilization that relied on soldiers to defend its prosperity, its monuments, and its gods. Military service in ancient Egypt was, at times, an obligation, and at other times, an opportunity. For ordinary men, being called to serve meant leaving behind their families and fields. During harvest seasons, this was a heavy burden. Yet the state required soldiers not only to protect against raids from neighboring peoples, but also to expand Egypt's influence beyond the Nile Valley. Life as a soldier was demanding. Men trained with simple weapons, spears tipped with bronze, wooden shields covered in leather, and bows that could send arrows flying across the desert air. In later dynasties, they learned to harness the power of the chariot, the swift two-wheeled vehicle drawn by horses, which became a symbol of military prestige. To master the chariot required both balance and coordination, one man driving, the other firing arrows as the wheels bounced over uneven ground. The day-to-day reality of military life, however, was not just battle. Soldiers camped in makeshift tents, cooked their meals over small fires, and marched long distances under the relentless sun. Rations were simple: bread, dried fish, onions, and beer. Water was precious on campaigns, especially when traveling far into desert lands or across Sinai. The army was organized into divisions, each named after a god, divisions of Amun, Ra, Pata, and so forth. This tied military service to religious duty. To fight for Egypt was to fight under the gaze of the gods. Officers ensured discipline, and punishments for disobedience could be severe, though camaraderie among soldiers softened the hardships. When Egypt was threatened, soldiers defended the narrow valley of the Nile, the very lifeline of the civilization. From the deserts came nomadic raiders. From the south, Nubian warriors skilled in archery. From the east, the Hittites and other great powers of the ancient Near East. The Battle of Kadesh, fought under Ramses II against the Hittites, remains one of history's most famous clashes. It was a struggle of chariots, strategy, and endurance. Though the battle ended inconclusively, it led to one of the earliest recorded peace treaties, a recognition that even the mightiest armies needed balance, not endless war. Yet for most soldiers, their lives did not consist of great battles, but of smaller expeditions. They guarded trade routes, escorted envoys, and maintained watch over Egypt's borders. Some were stationed in distant lands, such as Nubia or Canaan, where they garrisoned fortresses and collected tribute. Imagine the loneliness of such a posting, far from home, surrounded by foreign landscapes, living in a stone outpost with a handful of comrades. Soldiers were also part of the pharaoh's grandeur. When a king celebrated his victories, long processions of troops paraded before the people. Standards with the names of divisions fluttered in the wind, and soldiers carried their weapons in ordered ranks. Reliefs carved into temple walls immortalized these scenes. Pharaohs smiting enemies, soldiers advancing in neat files, prisoners bound and kneeling. These images were not only historical records, but also symbols meant to inspire awe and reinforce the king's power. There was honor in military service. A successful campaign could bring rewards, land grants, golden collars of honor, or even advancement into higher ranks. For some, military life was a pathway to status. Yet the risks were ever present. A wound or illness far from home often meant never returning. The silence of the desert and the uncertainty of distant wars weighed heavily on many. Charioteers, in particular, stood apart as an elite. They were trained not only for speed and combat, but also for ceremonial roles. During festivals or royal parades, chariots displayed the might of Egypt, gleaming with bronze fittings and pulled by well-groomed horses. The image of the pharaoh charging into battle at the reins of a chariot, bow drawn and arrows ready, became one of the central icons of Egyptian kingship. It is also worth noting the role of foreign soldiers. Egypt sometimes recruited Nubians, Libyans, and mercenaries from other regions to serve in its armies. These men brought different fighting styles and weapons, enriching Egypt's military, while also revealing the interconnectedness of the ancient world. Even in peacetime, military forces were essential. Soldiers helped with large state projects, building canals, raising monuments, and transporting stone blocks. Just as peasants were conscripted for corvée labor, Soldiers were often redirected from war to construction. A man might wield a spear one season and haul limestone the next, both in service to the pharaoh. Imagine, then, the rhythm of a soldier's life, the long march under the hot sun, the sharpening of weapons by torchlight, the sudden call to arms, and the uneasy nights in foreign lands. All the while, thoughts of home linger, the family left behind. The Nile flowing steadily, as it always has, the longing for the simple peace of the fields. In the end, the Egyptian soldier stood as both protector and tool of empire. His sweat and sacrifice guarded the temples, enriched the pharaoh, and allowed Egypt's civilization to flourish for millennia. Yet his life, though honored in inscriptions, was often one of hardship, uncertainty, and quiet endurance. A reminder that even in the grandeur of history, survival was never simple. Close your eyes and picture an Egyptian village at dusk. The day's work is done. Fields grow quiet, and smoke rises lazily from clay ovens. Yet somewhere in the settlement, a family gathers in worry. A child coughs without pause, or a farmer clutches his back after long days of labor. Illness and injury were part of life in ancient Egypt, just as they are now. But how were they treated in a world thousands of years before modern hospitals, vaccines, or antibiotics? Medicine in ancient Egypt was a curious blend of practical knowledge and spiritual ritual. Healers knew the body in surprising detail. They had observed wounds, broken bones, fevers, and childbirth over generations, and they developed remedies that often worked. Yet they also believed that many ailments came from the unseen, from angry gods, malevolent spirits, or the imbalance of cosmic forces. And so, Egyptian healing was always both science and magic. Imagine entering the home of a physician, known in Egyptian as a snow. The room is filled with the earthy smell of herbs. Small jars line the shelves, powdered minerals, dried plants, resins, honey, and oils. A reed, pen, and papyrus might be nearby, containing lists of remedies and incantations copied from older texts. The physician sits calmly, listening to the patient's complaints, observing their body, perhaps feeling their pulse or examining their eyes. Some of the earliest medical writings in the world come from Egypt. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, reads almost like a surgeon's handbook. It describes fractures, dislocations, wounds, and treatments in astonishingly methodical detail. If you examine a man with a broken jaw, it might instruct: you should bind it with cloth soaked in oil. The descriptions avoid superstition, showing a rational approach to trauma. Another text, the Ebers Papyrus, is much broader. It lists hundreds of remedies for ailments of the stomach, eyes, skin, and more. Many involve herbs: garlic for infections, honey for wounds, willow for pain relief. Modern science has shown that honey, in particular, is antibacterial, making it a surprisingly effective treatment. Other remedies seem strange to us today: mixtures of crocodile dung, powdered stone, or animal fat. These might not have worked, but they reveal the experimentation and symbolic thinking of Egyptian healers. Healing was not only physical. Priests played an important role in medicine, using spells and rituals to drive away illness. A headache, for instance, might be treated with both a poultice and a prayer to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and protection. Incantations were whispered over amulets worn around the neck. A patient might sleep in a temple, hoping for a healing dream sent by a god. In this way, medicine was holistic, treating body, mind, and spirit together. Surgery existed, but it was limited. Physicians stitched wounds with linen thread, drained abscesses, and set broken bones using splints made from reeds or wood. Skull fractures and deep injuries were often fatal, but minor operations could be successful. The Egyptians were skilled at bandaging. Their knowledge of wrapping the dead for mummification surely informed their ability to protect the living from infection. Dentistry, however, was a constant struggle. The Egyptian diet was full of bread ground with stone tools, which left traces of sand in the flour. Over time, this wore down teeth to painful stubs. Jaw infections were common, and though physicians tried remedies of herbs and ointments, dental problems caused much suffering. Archaeologists have found mummies with severe tooth decay, abscesses, and even attempts at primitive dental fillings. Childbirth was another perilous frontier. Women gave birth squatting on bricks, supported by female relatives or midwives. Protective spells and amulets were used to guard mother and child from spirits. Remedies for easing labor included herbs, oils, and even fumigation with incense. Surviving childbirth was never guaranteed, but Egyptian women left behind images and prayers showing their hope for safe delivery and healthy children. The line between doctor and magician was never firm. Some healers leaned more on herbs and surgery, others on charms and rituals. Both were respected, and both were needed. After all, in a world without microscopes or germ theory, what could not be seen was often feared most. Yet medicine was also a matter of state. Pharaohs employed court physicians, some of whom became famous. There were even specialist doctors, some devoted only to the eyes, others to the stomach, others to childbirth. The Greek historian Herodotus later marveled at this specialization, finding it unusual compared to Greek practice. In military campaigns, physicians traveled with the army, tending to wounds and illnesses. Soldiers injured by arrows or falls from chariots relied on their skill. Poor on construction sites, too, where men dragged heavy stones and toiled in the heat, injuries were constant. A healer might be summoned to treat a broken limb, a crushed foot, or heat stroke from the blazing sun. Imagine, for a moment, being a patient in Egypt. You lie on a reed mat while a physician leans over you. He murmurs a prayer to Thoth, god of wisdom, before preparing a remedy. A poultice of herbs is placed on your wound, bound with clean linen. He offers you a drink, bitter but carefully measured. As he works, incense burns nearby, filling the air with a sweet, calming scent. Outside, the Nile flows as it always has, steady and eternal. The healer's hands are steady. his voice calm, and though pain lingers, you feel the comfort of care. The legacy of Egyptian medicine endures. Many remedies were passed to the Greeks, then to the Romans, and ultimately to the medieval world. Their combination of observation, ritual, and experimentation laid early foundations for later medicine. And yet, for the ordinary Egyptian, medicine was never just about science. It was about trust, hope, and the struggle to endure in a land where the sun burned hot. The deserts stretched endlessly, and life was fragile. Healing was an act of faith as much as of knowledge, a reminder that survival required both the hands of men and the favor of the gods. And so, as our long journey through ancient Egypt comes to a close, let us pause for a moment. We have walked through the mud of the Nile fields, side by side with sunburned farmers who bent their backs in service of both family and pharaoh. We have stepped into the quiet homes of mud brick walls, listening to the chatter of children and the clatter of neighbors. We have watched kings rise and fall, Akhenaten lonely and determined, daring to change the gods themselves. We have traced the delicate hands of scribes as they inked their papyrus, hour after hour, preserving words that still speak across the centuries. We have descended with the souls of the dead into the book of the dead, drifting through spells and gates. Guided by the eternal promise of Mat, we have followed the priests, heads shaved, bodies purified, performing the endless rhythm of rituals in temples vast and echoing. We have glimpsed the grandeur of Ramses II in his palace, where every hour was ordered, every gesture part of the theater of kingship. We have sat at the low tables of farmers and laborers, breaking coarse bread, sipping cloudy beer, savoring dates and onions under the desert sky. We have wandered through markets filled with noise and dust, stalls of fish, clay, and linen, hearing the timeless murmur of trade. We have stood beside soldiers on campaign, watching their discipline, their fatigue, their loyalty to gods and pharaoh. And we have lain on red mats under the hands of healers, breathing the fragrance of herbs, hearing both prayers and remedies whispered for our recovery. Through it all, Egypt has revealed itself as both familiar and strange, a world of toil and hope, of suffering and belief, of immense power and fragile lives. It was not simply a land of pyramids and mummies, but of people, men and women whose daily struggles and quiet resilience built one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. As you rest now, let the Nile's eternal rhythm accompany your breathing. Imagine the steady flow of water, bringing life to the fields year after year. Imagine the sound of papyrus reeds rustling in the breeze, and the faint hum of prayers rising in the temple courtyards. The world of ancient Egypt drifts slowly away, like a bark carried downriver, its lantern glowing faintly in the dusk. You are left with the calm of knowing that life, however difficult, always carries its patterns, work and rest, birth and death, struggle and peace. Let these patterns soothe you now. Let your mind settle like sand after the wind, soft and still. Rest as the people of the Nile once rested after their long days. Close your eyes and drift gently into the quiet. Good night.